Timeless Topics. In this episode, we discuss everything from how broken the healthcare system is to unit culture to the importance of belonging in all relationships, including those between clinicians. In true Timeless Topics nature, we try to answer the question, how do we fix it? Please let us know how you feel like we did. We're grateful you're here with us. Let's jump right into the discussion.
As we were talking this past weekend with some colleagues, I understand that a large part of our issues and barriers with growing the workforce is the fact that some of us are disillusioned. And how do you engage with these new people without demonstrating your disillusion, right? Because I can play the game, but then I start to sound fake. And I can only hold that facade for a certain period of time before it becomes exhausting. But I also recognize that I need to maintain that facade because how else am I going to convince people that they should do this role? And so it becomes this vicious cycle that I'm not quite sure how we get off of this merry-go-round that we're on right now. Um,
That's your toxic culture, right? I mean, that's,
right,
yeah.
right.
But
Yeah.
I think to your point, it's sometimes it's institutional based, but sometimes it's just like the entirety of healthcare is what it feels like.
Right.
Like
Wow.
I find myself saying to my students of whatever type, whether they're new grad, been here for 30 years, whoever they are, right? Is like, guys, I don't know how we got here, but it is not good. Like wherever we are, and I disillusioned, I think is a good way to put it, right? Because I came into healthcare with like constantly hearing about nursing shortages, constantly hearing about, all the hyper focus on the wrong thing, quote unquote, whatever the wrong thing of the moment was, right? Like it was like this constant talk of everything's breaking, the system is broken, we're going to be devastated when everybody retires and we have no nurses, right? It's like I came into that era of nursing.
Mhm.
And then the pandemic just like we slid down that hill, like just no stops, just fully down, crash and burn towards the bottom. And now we're in this place where you can't keep anybody anywhere. Like, and the NICU has always historically been protected from that
Right.
environment, but not anymore, right? And so you can't keep no matter what role it is, whether you're talking about a nurse, a leader, an NP, anybody, nobody stays anywhere. So then your culture really truly just falls apart because there's nobody there to maintain it. And sometimes the people that are there are not the people you want designing the culture. And so then you end up in places where you're like, how did we get here? And how can we back this back up? Because here I am trying to usher these, newly licensed people in and being like, okay, just please stay. Like, please, because somebody had, like, we have to work on this together, because yes, I want to retire, but also, like, as someone who loves nursing, I want nursing to survive whatever this is.
Right.
We can't all be replaced with robots.
Right. Do you think the pandemic broke us?
I feel like we were on the track to being broken and it was like the straw, right? But
Yeah.
we had been cracking for, I mean, decades, I feel like.
I think it exposed what was really just rotting underneath, you
Yeah,
know,
fair enough.
because it was so catastrophic. It was so acute. The substructure that had been eking along for decades wasn't able to withstand it. And I don't think many people were terribly surprised, by how it all fell apart rather. But I think folks do seem surprised that we're not able to get back to wherever folks thought we were beforehand. But I think where we were beforehand was really just denial and survival. Um, y- you know,
No, I totally agree, right? Like sometimes it's rose-colored glasses thinking back, right?
Mm.
And there are definitely good times. Like there are times when I'm like, oh, remember when preceptors were like this? I remember when like circle time was a thing and like you knew your peers and like you might not have liked everybody, but you knew them, And now I feel like you go on any given unit and you're like, like like you can just tell even as like a stranger walking in, you're like, oh, the vibes just feel so different.
Yeah.
And that has to impact the way the team ultimately functions, right? Because if we don't feel like I have your back and I know you as a person, let alone as a clinician, that impacts the way we provide care collectively, right? And so it feels very scary. I don't think, to your point, Mary, that there's a back to go back to, right? I don't think there's like, oh, 1997 is when we should go for. Um, but it's like, okay, we've been through a lot. We've gone on this journey. I feel like everybody but venture capitalists can agree that right here is not good, right? So then how do we get out of this? How do we design the future of healthcare, right?
Mhm.
Sounds lofty, sounds not fun, sounds like a very timeless topics question, right? Where we're like, how do we fix the world in 38.7 minutes? Go.
Well, I think I like your thought that, there's not a back, right? Because you can't go back. The patients are different. The families are different. Like technology is different, right? So even if we did say in 1990, whatever, this was the ideal time for us, the babies are not like the babies that we had back then. Our families are not. Our families are more educated. Our families know more about their rights, right? We know more about what we should be doing with our families, i.e., trauma-informed care, right? Like we know more. So we should be different. I do worry that even to make that evolution, though, I said disillusioned because I don't like to use the old and bitter because that just sounds negative. I use it when I'm talking about myself, but whatever. But it does have a negative connotation. But I do worry that there are some of us that are so disillusioned, and you see this younger generation coming in and they are not behaving the way that you think they should or want them to. So you become further disillusioned, which then affects your interaction with them. And again, vicious cycle, like vicious cycle. And I don't know how to fix that because I saw it in myself, right? It was like, ew. And then it's like, oh, I can't, because then they're going to be like, see, you're mean. That's why we don't want to do this. Or you're unhappy. That's why we don't want to be an NNP. But internally, I'm like, ew. Like, it's like, come on, are you serious? This is how you behave. This is how you act. And I don't know how to navigate that because there were times that it's like, I want to offer feedback, but I know that my feedback is not going to be seen in the right way. It's not going to be received in the manner that I'm trying to deploy it. It's not punitive, it's not mean. It's just, I want you to know this so that you can be better and grow and be better.
It's a microcosm of the larger society. And when you were talking, Trace, I had this vision of and it might be because my favorite sweater, I wore it out again, on the elbow, and it makes me crazy. But I thought of like like a weave and a bunch of threads. And in nursing, well, just because I'm a nurse, I'm just going to kind of say nursing, we kind of started out in the early stages. I mean, and it wasn't perfect then either. I mean, we had a lot of the systemic-ish challenges then as well, but there seemed to be a little more um, proximity in our rapport with each other, right? We didn't have all the tech, we didn't have all the complexity, and all those other kinds of things. And I think over time, we've kept the threads the same, but we've put more weight on it, put more expectation. And so we're pulling on all these threads. We're disconnecting ourselves from each other, but we're still having to hold even a lot more now because we are so disconnected. And I think that just kind of feeds into this, that it almost like you wish someone could just say, fix it. You got to fix it. But this isn't a fixing thing. This is a shared responsibility, a shared connection. Think of it as a dysfunctional family, which plenty of them around, but if you come into my house as a guest and I am running a dysfunctional household, you might not be able to actually identify what the issue is, but you can feel it, right? You can feel it in your bones. And I'm so close to it, I've adapted to it. I don't even recognize it anymore. So I'm just thinking, well, wasn't she off a little bit when she came into my house, and I kind of liken that analogy to the clinicians are the dysfunctional family, and then the guests, if you will, the patients that come into the space, they're not in a great spot, but they need you, but you're not able to really meet them there because you're already kind of just treading water, on these stretched fibers, and you just don't know what to do. And so I think what it takes is us having these conversations, recognizing that this ain't right. How do we reweave that sweater back into a more tighter, right? I mean, you know, I think we go to the extreme is like, oh, just chuck it and get a new sweater, just chuck it and get a whole new staff. Well, that's not going to work either because the backdrop of the space isn't providing people with a sense of safety, right? A sense of belonging, a sense of that they're respected, all of those core elements. And yet we're being like, brr, 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 in the face. You need to be respectful and create a sense of safety and welcoming to all of those other people that come in. But you're like, well, that's not even here. Like, how do we do that? So I think there's lots of moving parts to it. But it really takes us kind of, saying, all right, we got to go back to the drawing board. What do I need to be here? Bitching and moaning. Sometimes it does feel good. I feel like a teapot. It feels good to let that steam out. But then after I let it out, then where am I left? If I'm left with emptiness, then that's just going to piss me off again. So I don't know, that's kind of my take on this, to really help people see that if you want to change, it's not the CEO, it's not that negative Nelly, it's not that medical director. It's the three of us figuring out how do we begin to help people feel safe, feel respected, and then with that momentum. Absolutely not easy. Probably should have prefaced that. You all know that. But it does take that commitment, I think, right? To wanting to heal the space.
I don't mind a good vent session, but it's got to lead to action. Like you've got to translate it to
Yeah.
like, sure, let's blow off some steam, but
Mm,
then what?
yeah.
Well, and I think that's the thing, right? Do people want to heal? Do people want to be better? Or
Mm,
have we now just completely devolved to this place where people are like, it's just what it is?
mhm,
Right. And I think that that is also an area of disconnect because there are so many people, especially those who may have seen it in a different arena, and one institution that I work in, it just makes me sad because
mm,
I see how it has evolved over time and it has not been a positive evolution, right? And then it makes me mad when I see people come in and they're just like, it's just what it is. And it's
yeah.
like, no, it doesn't have to be like this,
I
right? And so then you have this friction because it's like, no, no, we have to do better. We can do better. I've seen us do better. And they're like, you're living in the old times, and that's not what it is anymore. And this is just okay.
yeah. As you said that, what you make me think of is it almost feels like it's something that can sometimes feel hard to articulate because when you're in a good space, when you're working with a good team, I mean, every cell in your body is like singing and dancing, and it just feels awesome. But sometimes, because you feel so safe in that space, it's sometimes hard to be able to dissect out what are the moving parts of this that are helping me feel this good and feel this connected, you know? And so it does, and that other thing that you said, because you're right, some people, what's the word? I just heard this recently, like existentially worn out. It was something around that, but they're so wrung out. And it is part of it is the work, and part of it is the everyday and our lack of attention because we are super performatively oriented and like I mean if I say I have a couple of hours left in the afternoon and I have a choice of like I'm going to just go sit down in my chair and read, or I really could mop the floor, I really could do all of these other things, and then I end up I might sit down for a minute, but then I feel so guilty because I really should get up and mop the floor and stuff. Well, we do that like pretty much, I think, in every facet of our life. So we're never, taking care of ourselves. And so you use the word straw, I think that broke the camel's back. I mean, I think sometimes when you're at work, that's what happens, right? And you're like, oh my God, paycheck and golden handcuffs. I don't think I can do this anymore because I'm so empty.
I got a text from somebody who does a lot of family, oriented, family centered work, right? Which is hard work trying to get a system who can't even seem to care for the patient in the bed. And sometimes not even the clinicians that's caring for the patient, but then now you want to add an added layer of the family, right? And it was just this real moment of sometimes it's hard. And sometimes I want to give up because it's hard,
Yeah.
right? And so it's taking that moment and saying, you know what? It's okay to validate and say out loud that it's hard. It's
Yeah.
okay to take a break, right? Now, does it mean like change your name and go to another country? Like, if that's your story, go for it. But like, sometimes we have to like take the moments to step back, figure out what can I shift? How can I restore, my fill my cup kind of mentality? Who can I be in community with who can help carry this along so that the work doesn't have to stop just because I need a break,
Mhm.
right? Um, and then realize that, okay, I do have people. How can I do that? And then build like a human chain, if you will, to keep things sustained so that we can still make those shifts without having to completely deplete one individual. I think to your point, Mary, what's challenging is a lot of people feel that they're being depleted by every single like intersection that they have in their life. They're depleted as a parent, they're depleted as a friend, they're depleted as a provider or a, caregiver of some type. They're depleted as a person in a country. They're, like a person who goes to the grocery store. Like you're just every area of life is hard. Whereas I feel like in other times, and perhaps this is rose-colored glasses, but in other times that you're like, but everything wasn't as heavy.
Yeah.
So you could be like, okay, this is heavy and I don't love it, but I can do it because XYZ is not heavy.
Yeah.
But now it's just like all the systems are just weighing down on you.
Yeah.
And you're like, well, now I got to care about this. I mean, geez, I'm running out of things to care about.
Right.
Even though I want intellectually and in my heart, I want to care about all of them. But you can't die on every hill. You'd be dead like 10 times before you finish your coffee,
Yeah.
you know?
You made me think of beach erosion. Like when we go down to the Cape, and it's like, oh, the more erosion of the beach, and it ain't coming back. And all these different strategies that they try and employ to try and hold on to what is still, kind of in a dune or whatever the situation is. That feels like, what we're doing now, but when, that's reactive. It's not being proactive and figuring out, I wonder if there's something we could do before this entire dune collapses and goes into the ocean. I wonder if there's something we can do before this entire NICU staff, gets up and walks out and never comes back. And I think there are, but I agree with you. It's exhausting. And how can we rebuild people's energy substrate or, like whatever the right lingo is, that I can do this. Oh, you're going to do it with me? Okay. All right. I can do this. I mean, it's a little bit more complicated than that, right? I mean, but I think it's a starting place. I apologize. I cut you off there, Trey. So you're gonna,
No, it's okay because it made me think that, when you're talking about it, and you're talking about people just being so burned out from all of the various layers, that maybe that's when we need to do better about giving grace, right? And so instead of just assuming that someone is complacent with this new status quo, maybe they are just so overwhelmed by everything, they can't pick this hill to die on,
yeah,
right? Just because for me right now in mine, I had sleep, I ate, this is the hill I'm gonna die on.
yeah,
Talked to me last week, and I'm like, you know what? I don't care about nothing. Okay, right? And maybe that's where some people are. So instead of just assuming that they're okay with it, maybe
yeah,
they just can't process it right now. And that's when we have to take a step back and say, just because I think this is an emergency right now, doesn't mean that it's an emergency for everybody because we don't know what's going on in their life. We don't know what's happening in their world. We don't know if personally they are just trying to make it through today. And
mhm,
so whether or not this NICU goes belly up,
yeah,
not going to impact whether or not my loved one is not okay physically, mentally, right? And so I don't care right now.
yeah,
And you can't make me.
yeah. God, that
But
was beautifully said.
yeah, and I just keep going back to like building enough community so that the work can still keep happening and we can still keep fighting these systems and holding these systems accountable
Yeah.
so that we can eventually maybe, see some shifts and some change. And like, maybe I'm delusional. Maybe it takes a little delusion to do this work, but it's, to say like, okay, I think we can do this. Not one person is not going to be able to, one group of people is not going to be able to, but you've got to keep that momentum somehow, right? And it is grace and saying like, okay, today I got to sit down. I can't run this part of the race, right?
Yeah.
Like I got to sit, but I got you, come the next time, right? When this part settles, I'm going to step in and take the baton and keep us moving. I think again, to Mary's point that she makes frequently, like it's by design though to do this, right? To make us feel depleted. So we'll just take the scraps that are offered and keep it going. But when you're talking about the fragile infrastructure of a neonatal like brain and their relationship to their community and their families, scraps are not enough. That
Right.
that is just not acceptable. We can't just say, oh, well, you didn't die, so that's good.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you as you were speaking, I was thinking of the talk that you did this afternoon. That there was a really awesome webinar. It talked about stigmatizing language in the NICU, or is it kind of perinatal, family-centered care task force. Wouldn't it be interesting if all of these really important, absolutely hands down important initiatives, before we decide to roll it all out and extract more from people that don't have much left to give, to find your bias and be a better, get that out of there and be a better person and choose better language and all this other kind of stuff. Let me just suck a little more out of you. How about maybe we try operationalizing a reduction in stigmatizing language, a reduction in bias amongst ourselves? Like we use ourselves as the proving ground, as the practice playground, so to speak. If we want to really figure out how important family-centered care is, to your point, Trace, about like maybe my family member isn't really doing well and I'm collapsing on the inside and I'm trying to hold it all up. If you really believe in family-centered care, it's not just about the family on the other side of the crib. It's about each other's family too. And even trauma-informed care, right? I mean, I think we have had this conversation before. Yes, it's absolutely for the people that are in the throes of trauma. And you know what? Right now, I'm also in the throes of trauma. I'm not saying my needs are more important than anybody else. But we also have that, kind of hierarchy about freaking everything. How about I'm traumatized and they're traumatized? How are we going to help all of us navigate it? Maybe I just need a cup of tea, or maybe I need to go home. You know what I mean? But think about like those small moments that we create for babies and families that seem super inconsequential to us. Like maybe when I sit down next to this mother who's just weeping because her baby, who probably will only be in the hospital 24 hours, but she is absolutely devastated. And even that, I wasn't trying to sound judgy on that, but I know that we have these preconceived notions about that. But maybe I just sat down and said, this must be so difficult. What can I do to help? Or whatever that thing is. And I also go over and I see Jessi really trying to hold it all together. She looks like she's on the edge of just breaking down. And I say, hey, Jess, let's go in the lunchroom and have a cup of coffee. And you know what? I just asked Tracey if she would watch my assignment over there. What can I help? Can I just sit here with you? Do you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
if it could be an and, I think I wouldn't feel, I think, getting rid of stigmatizing language is wicked important, but maybe I'm also a victim of stigmatizing language. I'm being metaphorical here, like I am trying to be respectful of everything, but do you know what I mean? Like it's not only othering, it's all of us.
Well, I mean,
Like,
what you're calling out is that all of the parties in this equation are people, right? And
yeah,
they
there you
all
go.
are people and they all have a history. They all have needs. They all have wants. They have desires. They have all these things that are probably not being fully supported, if at all, right? So, sure, there is a hierarchy, whether we want one or not, because, I'm not a fan, right? But there is a hierarchy between, clinicians and families, whether we want it there or not. Because in the end, like Mia always says, I am paying to be there and
Yes,
someone else is getting a paycheck, right? So, like, there are some transactional ways.
yes,
But
right.
we also can say, this was challenging for everybody in
Mm,
different ways,
mm,
right? It wasn't the same way, but there's a certain patient story that I usually share when I teach NRP, and it was around a code that was not successful. And I de-identify and all the things, but I share it every time I speak because sometimes we don't win in the end. And how we handle that loss, literally and metaphorically, matters,
yeah,
right? How we handle it for the family, how we facilitate this, terrible outcome, right? But also how we navigate it amongst ourselves. And so it's always a bummer to end NRP with it, but I feel like we have to talk about the full human experience of resuscitation, right? And the impact that it has on all of us.
yeah,
And now, does it mean that me being sad and needing to hug my baby when I get home is more important than this person who tragically lost their child despite efforts to not? No, absolutely not, right? But I don't need to grade it on the scale of somebody is better and somebody is worse. It's not like the suffering Olympics kind of thing, right? I can say this is an innate tragedy that I am unequivocally going to hold space for, but also my experience was also impactful in a completely different way.
yeah.
I'm not going to go to this mother and extract from her grief to
No,
care for my grief, but I am going to go to my community, whether it's my peers or my family or somebody to be like, I need somebody to carry this part for me because y'all don't know what I try to carry for these people today. And I did my damnedest and it still didn't go well. So I need somebody to hold space for what that's like, right? Because in the end, we're all people. And I think we're expected to just put it on a shelf. We're done. You're done. You clocked out. Don't talk about it. It's that unless it's good gossip and tea, then we can talk all the day long about it. But if it's something real, then it's like, no, why are you talking about? No, that's not, you don't know them like that. And you're like, I don't have to still be impacted by their story.
right. And you have to have a space though. I mean, that was so beautiful. You gave me gooseflesh when you were sharing that space thing, having space for the patient and the family, and then also needing space yourself. But what happens when you bump up into a space that isn't there, that can't hold that for you, right? And so then, you kind of you yeah, you know what I mean? Like, I think that's beginning of that, that cracking that happens in your heart and your soul that, leads to more of this existential exhaustion and moral distress and all of the things just kind of keep piling onto each other.
But then
Mm,
you find yourself a circle, right? You
exactly.
might be in three different states and sometimes multiple time zones, but you just make it work. And it takes 7 years to schedule anything, but
It's what it
you
is.
find your people
Yeah.
who are willing to help you fill cups, right? And
Mhm.
for some people, that might be somebody they're physically next to and can do that work with, or go to dinner with, or drinks, or whatever makes them happy, right? And for some people, you pay $600 for a plane ticket to go stay at their house. Like you do what you've got to do, right? Because I feel like in a world that is constantly being driven away from community, despite tools that are supposed to create it, we have to get creative in how we define our own community and put in more effort. And while I wish villages were more accessible, that's just not happening right now. So then you can either sit and say, well, this is terrible, and I'm having all these issues that are all valid. No one can say that they're not, but what are you going to do? Kind of echoing back to the earlier start of this, right? Of like, we can all sit and hold hands and talk about how terrible it is, or we can be like, you know what? It's not ideal, but I'm going to do it this way because this is going to get me through. And then I'm going to build on that. And then we're going to keep going. And eventually we'll get somewhere.
Yeah.
When community isn't accessible here, you've got to find community somewhere else,
Yeah.
Um,
And
and
it
it's,
feels like you're coming.
it's weird, I think, but it's also just what's needed. I think it's weird for other people who don't have to do it that way. Um, but I've always been a quality over quantity kind of lady.
I love how you're highlighting though. There's just a variety of different ways, right? To meet that need, build that bridge, but you have to be able to see it, which kind of does come back to the letting off the steam. Okay, now that you let out all that steam, is your vision a little bit more clear? Where do we go from here? Um, because it doesn't have to always be like this, as both of you guys said it.
But Jessi, that could be a plug for like professional organizations, conference attendance, team building things. I know they sound very cheesy when you think about team building, but it doesn't have to be the formal team building, but just something where you get out of that workplace and can just, right? Like I could never quite explain why going to some of the conferences was so just kind of refreshing, but you hit it right there, right? Because yes, it is about the learning and continuing to expand your knowledge base and doing all of the professional growth and development. But sometimes it is also just about sitting with people that as professionals, but you also know as people and just sharing a drink or having snacks and sitting by the ocean and watching the sunset and just enjoying company, right? With people who are like-minded for this particular aspect of life. And just saying, okay, we're going back into it renewed and refreshed and we got this, right? We can rebuild. We can make positive change. Not even necessarily going back to what was, but how do we move forward to building it even better than what it was?
It's diversifying, right? So you can have all those multi-layers in your Venn diagram, right? Of like maybe the tiny sliver in the teeny middle is like NICU, right? And then you add in like, okay, but you also like to read books about anti-racism and therapy principles. Okay, you also, like to go watch sunsets on the beach. But this person doesn't like those things, but they really like concerts. So it's like finding all of those connections so that you can build that like web so that as you're going through different intersections of your identity, you can find people who can find community with that, right? Because there are definitely parts of me that I think a lot of the NICU community is like, it's not for me. I don't like that, right? But then there are other parts where you're like, oh, but I can nerd out with you about this RCT though, because you're gonna really get this one that I couldn't take to somebody else. So it's like you don't have to have this like monolithic kind of support, but you do need support. And so, if it is like hooking in a professional side, we have the shared common commitment, right? Because not only are you a nurse, you went through the tragedies of nursing school, right? But also you chose the NICU, which is also a layer of tragedy, right? With our little segment of medicine that nobody seems to understand, right? So you understand that. Perhaps do you also enjoy this type of TV show or something else, right? It's like just dip your toe into that so that you can build that wide map of support.
The word that keeps bubbling up as you're talking about this web and connection and shared interest is belonging. Just the ease of what it feels like when you find your people. And you have so many different webs of that. Like you find your people who like what you said, RCTs. You find your people who like sitting on the beach. And oftentimes they can intersect, but that sense of belonging and the biology that goes along with it, I think is probably maybe a little bit of insight into how we can begin to rebuild cultures that can help us feel more safe, more seen, and more supported so that we can come back, and do the good work, maybe in small increments, but at least that's a starting place.
I'm always relieved when I find somebody who will also nerd out with me, but then I'm allowed to say curse words around.
Oh,
Because I keep it together for this podcast most of the time, not all the time. But there are times when I'm just like, I really need to say this, and it's got to be said this exact way. I'm going to do it, and we're going to see how this lands. And then it's like, okay, you're still here. All right, cool. So one of my few vices in life is I speed and I curse like a sailor. But I don't do it at work. I try to keep it under wraps. But when I combine the two loves though, that's like massive happiness for my brain. And it's not many people can do it, but once we get there, we're like, okay, you're getting put on a list. Like you're in my list of the people that I can be like, what the hell? Except for I would pick a much more spicy
more
word than
colorful
that.
word.
I am trying to avoid the explicit label on the podcast apps, guys.
I think that's wise. I think that's wise. Trace.
It's a part of my truth. Timeless Topics is Jessi Barnes, Tracey Bell, and Mary Coughlin. It is produced by Jessi Barnes and music from Carlos Bell. The thoughts and opinions shared here are those of the individual speakers and do not reflect the official policy or position for any of the speakers' employers or any other affiliated individual or entity.